They called me cruel for not inviting them to my wedding. Then I uncovered the messages proving their plan to hijack it. What I did next ended our family forever. You ever stand in front of the mirror, straightening your tie, heart pounding like a drum, knowing today's supposed to be the best day of your life, but deep down, all you can think about is the people who won't be there? That's the day I married the love of my life, surrounded by laughter, joy, and 80 of the finest folks I've ever known, but not my parents. Not my little brother. And if you think that was an easy choice, you don't know the kind of family I come from. I was 9 years old when my brother Neil had what you'd call his first episode. We were at his soccer game, a bright Sunday afternoon where the grass was damp from a morning sprinkle and the snack table smelled like orange slices and wet Gatorade bottles. Neil, who was 7 back then, sat on the bench with his coach kneeling beside him while my mom sprinted across the field like someone had fired a gun. She acted like he'd collapsed on the battlefield, clutching his chest. In reality, he just had a little trouble breathing after chasing the ball. Turned out to be asthma. Not the life-threatening, every week kind, no, the kind where you keep an inhaler in your backpack and stay out of dusty attics. But the diagnosis flipped a switch in my parents. From that day on, Neil wasn't just the younger sibling anymore, he became the sun around which our entire family revolved. And me? I became the shadow. It didn't start full-blown, not at first. But looking back, that's where the slope turned slippery. I remember practicing a piano solo for 3 months in 7th grade. It was for the winter concert and my music teacher had picked me to play something normally reserved for the advanced class. I'd stayed after school, sacrificed weekends, and wore my only good shirt that night, slicking back my hair with my dad's old pomade just to look the part. I checked the front row 10 times. Empty seats. My grandparents waved from the middle row, smiling sadly. My parents? They'd sent a text an hour before the show, "Neil's not feeling great, we're taking him home early." So sorry. Break a leg. Later, I found out Neil was at home playing Mario Kart. My grandmother had called to check in and could hear the TV in the background. "Sounds like he's doing fine," she'd said with that gentle disapproval only old ladies can pull off. It was always like that. Every event, every milestone, every moment where I might have felt seen, overshadowed by some sudden Neil emergency. My 16th birthday was supposed to be special. Grandparents flew in from Florida. Mom and Dad promised cake and streamers, said they'd handle it all. But on the day of, they took off in the car to grab the cake and never came back until it was dark. Neil apparently had a stomach ache. They took him to urgent care. The diagnosis? Seasonal allergies. The cake? Half-eaten by the time they got home. The rest of us had pizza and an off-brand cake from the corner grocery store. I tried to pretend it didn't matter, but when I looked at the picture later, everyone's smiling but me. Graduation? I was valedictorian. Straight A's. Part-time job at the local bookstore. Gave a speech about perseverance and sacrifice. The auditorium was packed except the front row where 2 seats were marked reserved but stayed empty. Neil was having a panic attack about finals. Finals that weren't even that week. You learn not to get mad after a while. You learn to swallow it, fold it into yourself, and wear it like armor. But that stuff doesn't disappear. It calcifies. College was war. I fought for scholarships, scraped together change, worked 2 jobs, lab assistant by night, waiting tables by weekend. I'd walk home under cold street lamps, textbooks under one arm, calluses on my palms from working the dish pit. Neil? Neil had a full ride courtesy of our parents' medical emergency savings. Never mind he hadn't used his inhaler in years. Never mind he'd started posting hiking selfies on social media. They just kept handing him the world on a plate while I built mine from scraps. By the time I met Jamie, I didn't even know how to react when someone celebrated me. First birthday with him? He threw me a party. Friends from work came, his family showed up with flowers and homemade food. His sister gave me a framed print of the cover page from my first research paper. I cried like, couldn't even speak kind of cried. I think that's when I knew I couldn't have them at the wedding. My parents. My brother. I could already see the disaster unfolding. Neil coughing during the vows, Mom rushing out in tears, Dad pacing with his phone to his ear like he was calling the Mayo Clinic. I talked it over with Jamie. For weeks. Tossed and turned at night, imagining those empty chairs. But in the end, I chose peace. I chose celebration without drama. What I didn't expect was the storm that came after. And the truth that came with it. You ever notice how silence can feel louder than yelling? That was the kind of quiet I got after the wedding invites went out. I didn't send any to my parents or Neil, and for a while, it was like they hadn't even noticed. I should have known better. Because when they did find out through a cousin's Instagram story of the reception, no less, it was like someone had lit a match and dropped it into a room full of gasoline. First came the texts, then the calls. My mom left a voicemail that started off calm and ended with her screaming into the phone that I was punishing Neil for being sick. My dad sent a 3-paragraph text that basically said I'd humiliated them in front of the entire family and that I owed them a public apology. Neil didn't message me directly, he let them do the talking, like always, but I knew he was behind it. He was always behind it, even when he claimed not to be. But the wedding? It was perfect. 80 people. That's all we invited. Mostly Jamie's side, his parents, his sisters, his cousins, a few close friends of ours from work and college. My grandparents were there, of course. My aunt and uncle from Texas showed up too, and they pulled me aside before the ceremony to tell me they'd never seen me look so happy. And I was happy. Not in a fireworks and champagne kind of way, but in that deep, quiet way that makes your chest feel a little fuller. Jamie's dad gave me away. His mom helped pin the boutonniere on my suit. His sisters danced with me like they'd known me since we were kids. For once, I didn't have to keep one eye on the exit waiting for the next crisis. But joy has a way of shining a light on what's been missing. Even as I danced, even as I laughed with Jamie under string lights and paper lanterns, there were moments when I glanced at the entrance, half expecting to see my dad standing there in his worn suit jacket, or my mom peeking in with tearful eyes. And always I'd imagine Neil showing up just to ruin it, pretending to gasp for air or clutch his chest like he needed an ambulance. That thought alone made me double down. I knew I'd made the right choice. But then came the twist I never saw coming. It started with my cousin Kay. She's always been sharp, always watching. She called me a few days after the wedding just to check in. But halfway through the call, she dropped a bomb. You know, she said, Neil told me something once, years ago. I wasn't gonna say anything, but after all this mess, I feel like you should know. Turns out, when they were teenagers, Neil had gotten drunk at a family barbecue. He pulled Kay aside and laughed about how easy it was to fake symptoms. Said it started as a joke, pretending to cough or say his chest hurt on days when I had something important. Said our parents were so quick to believe him that it became a game. A game. She paused, letting that sink in, then added, he said it made him feel powerful. That every time you got attention, he could just take it back. I swear I stopped breathing for a second. My whole childhood started rewinding in my head like a scratched-up tape, missed concerts, forgotten birthdays, empty bleachers. But that wasn't even the worst part. Kay had something else. She'd seen messages between my mom and another family member the week before the wedding, messages where my mom already suspected she wouldn't be invited. In them, she wrote something chilling. If Neil starts to feel unwell during the vows, maybe people will remember what really matters. What really matters? I sat down on the floor with my phone in my hand and just stared at the wall. There it was. The truth. It had never been about love or concern or even misguided parenting. It was a performance. A never-ending circus where I was never the main act. Jamie found me like that, eyes glassy, hands shaking. I showed him the texts. He didn't say much, just wrapped his arms around me and held on like the world was spinning off its axis. Later that night, I called Kay back. I asked if she'd be willing to share those messages with the rest of the family, especially the ones who were calling me selfish and cruel. She said yes without hesitation. And she did. She sent screenshots to a handful of relatives who'd been the loudest critics. By morning, the apologies started trickling in. My God, I had no idea, one aunt wrote. I always thought your parents were just protective of Neil, another said, but this is something else. Some family members went silent altogether. Others admitted they'd always noticed the favoritism but had been too afraid to speak up. And just a few called me brave. Brave? I didn't feel brave. I felt hollow, betrayed, and deeply, deeply tired. But one thing was clear now. I hadn't imagined it. I wasn't bitter or dramatic or attention-seeking. I was just a kid who'd grown up in a house where love had conditions. And I'd finally stopped paying the price. The night I read those texts from Kay, something shifted inside me. Like I'd finally found the last piece of a puzzle I didn't know I'd been trying to solve my whole life. And once it clicked, it couldn't be undone. It wasn't just disappointment anymore. It was betrayal, the kind that doesn't bruise skin but lives under it. Deep enough to change how you look at everything. I sat with it for days. Jamie and I barely talked about anything else. He kept reminding me I did the right thing by not inviting them. But now, more than ever, I needed to know the truth. All of it. So I started digging. I called my aunt, the one who always looked uncomfortable when my mom went on about Neil's latest flare-up. I laid it all out for her. The wedding, the texts, Neil's drunken confession to Kay. She didn't even sound surprised. "I've known for years something was off," she said quietly. "Your mom. She always made it about Neil. Even when you got that big promotion a few years ago, remember that family dinner?" I did. I had just been put in charge of a research team. My mom nodded once when I told her, then turned to brag about how Neil had landed a part-time job bagging groceries. Everyone laughed and cheered for him like he'd won the Nobel Prize. I remembered just sitting there, smiling politely, while the heat burned behind my eyes. My aunt said she regretted not speaking up sooner. "But it was like Neil's illness gave your mother purpose," she said. And I think deep down Neil knew that. He kept the act going because it made him special. I didn't know what to say. I just sat there holding the phone, the pieces still falling into place. And then, a week later, Neil emailed me. I stared at the message for a long time before opening it. The subject line was just, "I'm sorry." The email was long. Pages, almost. And for once, it wasn't filled with excuses or deflection. It was honest, raw. He admitted everything. Said it started when he was a kid, and he realized faking symptoms made our parents pay attention. He'd get ice cream, new video games, hugs. Meanwhile, I was off stage, clapping for achievements no one came to see. He said it became a habit, then a strategy, then a lifestyle. He wrote, "I didn't even know who I was unless I was sick. It was the only time they looked at me like I mattered." He talked about therapy, how he started going after a breakdown last year. Said the therapist helped him see how twisted everything had become. That what our parents did to me wasn't just favoritism. It was emotional neglect. And what they did to him was a different kind of damage, turning him into someone who didn't know how to function without being the center of a crisis. But then came the part that hit me like a gut punch. I saw the texts Mom sent about your wedding, about planning a distraction, and it made me sick. I wish I could say I was surprised, but I wasn't. I just finally saw it for what it was. He said he wanted to rebuild things with me, just the two of us. Without the noise, without our parents, without the manipulation. Said he understood if I couldn't forgive him, but he needed to tell me the truth. He ended it with, "You deserved better. You always did." I read that line over and over. I didn't know if I could forgive him. Not yet. But for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't carrying the weight of it alone. Like someone else had finally seen the same cracks in the foundation. When Jamie read the email, he looked up at me and said, "That took guts. But don't feel pressured to fix anything you didn't break." And he was right. This wasn't my mess to clean up. Still, something in me wanted to see Neil. Face to face. No screens, no phones, just a table between us and the air cleared once and for all. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop near the university. Neutral ground. I picked a table in the corner by the window, where the morning sun came through and made everything look a little softer than it really was. When Neil walked in, he looked older than I remembered. Tired, like someone who hadn't been sleeping much. He saw me and gave this cautious little nod, like a dog waiting to see if you're going to yell or open your arms. We sat. No small talk, just the truth. He apologized again out loud this time. Said he wasn't asking for forgiveness, just understanding. I told him I wasn't ready to let go of all the anger, but I appreciated him owning up to it. We talked for nearly 2 hours. About growing up. About how we both felt trapped, him by attention, me by the lack of it. Before we left, I asked him, "Do you think Mom and Dad even know what they did?" He looked down at his coffee and shook his head. "I don't think they want to know. If they did, they'd have to admit they were wrong." And maybe that was the saddest truth of all. That some people would rather live in denial than face the wreckage they caused. I haven't talked to my parents since. They still send messages, some angry, some begging, some pretending like nothing happened. I haven't answered any of them. Because for the first time in my life, I'm not chasing their love anymore. It's strange how a moment of peace can feel so foreign after a lifetime of tension. After that meeting with Neil, I walked out of that coffee shop into the early fall air, and I swear the sky looked a little clearer, like someone had wiped a smudge off a window. But peace in my world? It never lasted long. Because the thing about people who are used to being in control, like my parents, is they don't let go easy. A week after Neil's email and our conversation, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I shouldn't have opened it, but curiosity got the better of me. It was from my father. "You've made your point. Now come home and talk to us like a grown-up." That was it. No acknowledgement, no remorse, no hint that they'd even read the texts Kay sent or heard what Neil had confessed. Just a command. Like I was still some kid who'd thrown a tantrum and needed to be reined in. Jamie read it over my shoulder and shook his head. "They haven't changed," he said. "They just don't like losing control of the story." And that's exactly what this had become, a war of narratives. I told mine at the altar by leaving their seats empty. Neil had told his through a confession. And my parents? They were doing everything they could to repaint the past in their favor. That's when I got the call from Kay again. She sounded breathless, like she just finished running. "They're telling people Neil was hospitalized after the wedding," she said. "What?" "They're saying he had a panic attack when he found out he wasn't invited, ended up in the ER. But I saw him that day," she said. "At a Cubs game. Laughing. Drinking beer." My jaw clenched so tight it ached. They were still doing it, still spinning stories around Neil to make him the victim. Still using him as a shield for their own guilt. That's when Jamie's mom stepped in. Now, Jamie's mom is a pediatric nurse. Has been for over 3 decades. Seen everything from broken bones to parents who fake symptoms for attention. So when she heard what my family was claiming, she made the bold move to call my mother directly. Tried to be civil. Tried to open a door. Told her, kindly, that Neil's health didn't seem to match his lifestyle, that maybe it was time to talk honestly. My mom didn't even wait for her to finish the sentence before hanging up. Then she called Jamie's sister to complain about interference in family business. I couldn't believe it. After all this time, after all the evidence, after Neil's own confession, they were still clinging to the story like it was the only thing keeping their world upright. But here's the thing about stories, they fall apart when people start comparing notes. And mine wasn't the only one that had been ignored. I remembered homecoming. I was 17 and I'd saved for months to buy a dress. I'd been nominated for court, and for once I wanted to feel special. Neil got sick that night too, stomach pain that turned out to be nothing but gas. They left me behind, all dressed up with no one to take me to the dance. The dress stayed in my closet, unworn, tags still dangling from the sleeve like a cruel joke. And what about the summer I got accepted to a prestigious science program? The kind you dream about, the kind you work years to qualify for. I told them I could take a bus there and back. I had it all figured out. But Neil had a flare-up that summer too. They said I couldn't go. That family needed to stick together during health crises. I stayed home. Watched my dreams melt under a July sun. These memories came back like a flood. Not in flashes, but full reels playing on loop. And the more I remembered, the more I realized this wasn't just favoritism. It was sabotage. My whole life had been rearranged around keeping Neil at the center, and any time I threatened that balance, by achieving something, by standing out, they pulled me back down. That night, Jamie found me on the couch, holding the frame his sister had given me, the one with the cover page of my first published research paper. I couldn't even look at it. I felt like that girl had never really existed. Like she'd been edited out of the family photo album before the shutter even clicked. "You're still her," Jamie said. "You just finally stepped out of the frame they kept cropping you out of." I didn't respond. I just nodded, because if I tried to speak, I might have fallen apart. But deep down, I knew he was right. And what came next? It wasn't closure. Not yet. It was another twist. Kay called again, this time with screenshots. Messages between my mother and a relative sent before the wedding. They were planning a disruption. A way to make Neil unwell enough to pull attention back. That's when it hit me like a second betrayal. My mom wasn't just enabling Neil's behavior. She was creating it. And now I had proof. It's one thing to suspect the people who raised you don't have your best interests at heart. It's another thing entirely to see it written out in black and white. When Kay sent me those screenshots, I opened them with trembling hands, not sure if I even wanted to see what was on the other side. But I had to look. I had to know. There it was, my mother's name at the top of a message thread, plain as day, with words I'll never forget. "We need to be prepared. Neil might get overwhelmed. If he has a spell during the vows, it'll remind everyone what really matters. Not if he feels bad. Not if something happens. If he has a spell. A suggestion. A plan." That wasn't concern. That wasn't a worried mother. That was a chess move. My stomach twisted. I felt like I'd just read a crime scene confession, except the crime was every birthday, every graduation, every night I sat alone in a quiet room waiting for someone to show up who never would. And they hadn't even known if they were invited yet. That's what killed me. She was planning to hijack the moment even before they knew they were being excluded. as if the idea of me getting a day in the spotlight was already a threat to their version of family. I sent the screenshots to Jamie. His reply was just one word, unreal. But it was real. As real as the calls I started getting from the relatives who doubted me. Kay hadn't just sent the messages to me. She'd shared them with a few other family members who had sided with my parents, people who told me I was heartless, dramatic, punishing them for things that couldn't be helped. The shift in tone was immediate. One uncle called me that night and said, "I owe you an apology." I had no idea it went that deep. He admitted he'd seen the favoritism over the years, but always thought it was just a case of overprotectiveness. But this is manipulation. Another cousin who had been silent since the wedding finally messaged me. She said she never felt comfortable with how Neil was treated either, but didn't want to start a family war. Well, I replied, too late for that. It wasn't just validation. It was a revelation. These weren't isolated incidents. This was a pattern, a structure, a sick little ecosystem where my worth had always been measured against Neil's needs, and any time I got too close to balance, someone tilted the scales again. I remembered the choir solo I missed because Neil sprained his ankle at the family picnic. I remembered how, when I was finally accepted to a prestigious summer science program, I didn't go, not because I didn't want to, but because Neil had another health emergency that summer. My parents said it wouldn't be fair to leave while he was struggling. And now, years later, after I built a life without them, after I found someone who truly saw me, they had still been ready to sabotage that moment. I felt sick, angry, but also strangely relieved. Because for once, I wasn't questioning my own memory. I wasn't wondering if I was being ungrateful or selfish or cold. I had proof. And it didn't lie. I showed the screenshots to Jamie's mom. She read them without saying a word, then looked up at me and said, "This isn't just neglect. This is abuse. Emotional manipulation. You need to start thinking about what healing actually looks like." That word healing sounded like a foreign language. I'd spent so long surviving, proving myself, keeping my head down and my grades up that I didn't even know what healing meant. I only knew how to work harder, how to stay quiet, how to carry on. But maybe now I didn't have to do that anymore. Jamie suggested therapy. Said I deserved to unpack everything I'd buried just to get through life. And he wasn't wrong. There was a whole vault of things inside me, moments I'd labeled not that bad, just to make it through the next one. But now they had names. And wait, and the strangest part? Neil went quiet. After he sent that email apologizing, and after I told him we could meet, I tried following up a few times. Nothing. Radio silence. Kay said she tried talking to him too, told him she'd shared the messages with the family. Said he seemed angry. Defensive. He said I betrayed him, she told me. That I was taking sides. Taking sides. That was the phrase I kept turning over in my head like a stone with sharp edges. He had admitted the lies. He had apologized. But now that the truth was out in the open, he was slipping back into that old role, the one where he's the center of the storm and everyone else is supposed to orbit around him. Kay said she thought he was spiraling. That maybe for the first time he didn't know who he was without the chaos. I told her I couldn't fix that. I could forgive. Maybe. In time. But I couldn't go back. Not to that version of family. Not after everything I'd learned. And not when the next twist was just around the corner. You ever have one of those days where you wake up thinking maybe the dust is finally starting to settle, only to find out the storm's just changing direction? That was me the morning I opened my inbox and saw a message from Neil. I hadn't heard from him in weeks, not since our coffee shop talk where he looked me in the eye and said he wanted to change, wanted to rebuild something honest between us. I'd reached out since then. A few check-ins. No reply. And I'd started to make peace with the silence. But there it was. A long email. Pages like the first one. Only this time, the tone was different. It started with more apologies, familiar ground. But then it shifted. He told me our parents had found out about the email he sent me. Not because he showed them he wasn't that reckless, but because he'd left his laptop open while visiting home. Apparently, my dad saw the tab open, skimmed the draft, and exploded. They told me if I keep siding with you, they'll cut me off, Neil wrote. No more car, no more apartment. They said they've sacrificed everything for me, and now I'm throwing it all away for guilt. I leaned back in my chair as I read that line. Of course, the golden leash had snapped. And they didn't like the dog wandering too far from the porch. He said he was trying to find a full-time job. Said he was done living like a dependent. Said he didn't want to be another 30-year-old who couldn't support himself without parental backup. For the first time, he sounded like someone who actually wanted to grow. He asked if we could talk again, maybe even visit Jamie and me once we got settled in Boston. I didn't reply right away. I sat with it for a few days, let the idea settle like coffee grounds at the bottom of a mug. And I talked to Jamie, who, for all his kindness, didn't pretend to be thrilled about the idea. He's trying, Jamie said, but this can't just be about escape. If he's serious about change, it's gotta come with accountability. And he was right. Because while Neil was trying to rewrite his chapter, our parents were doubling down on the old script. They started calling again, this time with a mix of rage and guilt. First came my mom, voice cracking as she left voicemails about how this family is falling apart and how I was breaking your father's heart. Then my dad, who didn't bother with the emotional pitch. He just said I was selfish. Cold. That a real daughter wouldn't abandon the people who raised her. You've made your point, he said. Now be the bigger person. I didn't respond. I'd spent too many years being the one who swallowed the anger, made space, gave up her seat so someone else could have the spotlight. This time I was keeping my chair. This time I wasn't the one who owed anything. But that didn't stop them from spinning their version of the story to anyone who would listen. They called my aunt and uncle, claimed Neil's health was failing again, stress-related this time. Claimed I had triggered it. Claimed I was refusing to help in his time of need. But by now the family had seen the messages. They'd heard from Kay. They knew better. Even my uncle, the one who'd always played neutral, finally told me, I'm done defending them. You did everything right and they're just mad you finally stopped playing along. That night, Jamie's mom made a suggestion. You should talk to someone, she said gently. A real someone. Therapist, counselor. Just so you have a place to put all of this that isn't inside your chest. I hesitated. Not because I thought it was a bad idea, but because, after everything, I still wasn't used to someone trying to help me without strings attached. Still, I booked the appointment. And on the morning of the session, I sat in a quiet room with a stranger and started talking. About birthdays that felt like afterthoughts. About the weight of being invisible. About how I spent my whole life trying to earn applause in a theater where no one had shown up. The therapist listened. She didn't interrupt. And when I was done, she didn't try to fix me. She just said something simple. You weren't wrong. You were alone. Those words hit harder than any insult my parents ever threw my way. I was alone. But not anymore. Now I had Jamie. I had Kay. I had the truth. And maybe, just maybe, I had a brother who wanted to build something new from the ashes of what our parents burned down. But forgiveness? That was still on the horizon. Not behind me. And the next message I got would test that horizon more than anything else. You spend your whole life holding things together with duct tape and good intentions, and then one message, one sentence, can tear the whole thing apart again. I had just come home from work, shoes still on, coat halfway off, when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was from my mom. Not a voicemail this time. A text. Just one line. You poisoned your brother against us, and you'll regret it. I stared at it for a long minute, like maybe if I looked hard enough, I'd find a different meaning, a hidden context. But no, it was clear as day, an accusation laced with venom. And suddenly, every little bit of progress I thought we were making cracked under the pressure of their denial. I showed it to Jamie, who just shook his head. They don't want a relationship, he said. They want control. And you took that away. He was right. Again. That message wasn't about pain, it was about power. About how losing Neil's loyalty felt like a betrayal not just from him, but from me, as if I'd stolen something they believed was theirs. The thing is, I hadn't told Neil to take sides. I hadn't told him to cut them off or pick a team. All I did was tell my story. And for the first time in his life, he heard it without the usual filters. That was enough. What came next was worse. My dad started messaging Neil directly, guilt-tripping him, threatening to cut him off financially unless he stopped feeding the fire. Neil didn't respond right away, but eventually he sent me a screenshot of the final straw. It was a message from my dad that said, "You used to be a good son. Now you're a coward hiding behind your sister." That line burned in my gut, because for years I was the coward. I was the one hiding, the one who stayed quiet and made excuses for their behavior. But not anymore. I replied to Neil's screenshot with a simple text. You don't owe them anything you can't live with. He wrote back, I'm done being their puppet. True to his word, he started packing. Said he was moving out of the apartment they paid for, trading in the car, cutting the cord. Said he'd rather live broke and honest than comfortable and manipulated. I told him I'd help however I could, but not financially. That part he had to do on his own. And to his credit, he understood. But not everyone did. because the moment Neil stopped responding to them, they came after me harder. Emails, voicemails, even a letter, handwritten, in my mom's tight cursive. It was 3 pages of emotional landmines. Memories, half-truths, and a long paragraph blaming me for the disintegration of the family. She wrote, "You've always had a jealous streak, and now you've finally found a way to isolate us completely." I folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer. Not to keep, not really, but to remind myself later that I hadn't imagined any of this. That the story wasn't changing just because they were rewriting it. Then came the most unexpected twist of all. Neil got a job offer. He forwarded the email to me with 5 exclamation marks in the subject line. It was a mid-level analyst position at a firm in Boston. A job he'd applied for on a whim, not thinking it would lead anywhere. But it did. It was real. And he took it. He told our parents he was moving. Told them he didn't want contact for a while. Told them this was about becoming his own person, not choosing between family members. Their response? A voicemail from my father, cold as stone. "You're no son of mine. Good luck without us." Neil didn't flinch. Not this time. He moved into a small apartment with peeling paint and creaky floors. Nothing glamorous, but it was his. And when Jamie and I invited him over for dinner that first week, he showed up with a housewarming gift for us. A framed photo from our wedding he'd pulled off social media. "I wanted to be there," he said quietly. "I know I didn't deserve it, but I wanted to." We sat on the porch that night, the 3 of us, eating takeout and watching the sky fade from gold to navy. For the first time, it felt like maybe, just maybe, this mess had created something honest. Something new. But healing, I was learning, wasn't a straight line. Because that final message I got from my mom, it wasn't about guilt. It was a warning. And it turns out she wasn't finished. I used to think cutting someone out of your life was like slamming a door. Loud, final, unmistakable. But I've learned it's more like closing a window during a storm. You can still hear the wind howl. The rain still beats against the glass. The echoes still reach you, even when you swear you're done listening. 2 weeks after Neil moved into his apartment in Boston, things were starting to settle. He was figuring out his new job, trying to get used to his own space. Jamie and I were building our routine again. Quiet dinners, weekend walks, laughter that didn't have to compete with crisis. For once, life felt normal. Until the doorbell rang one Saturday morning. I wasn't expecting anyone. Jamie was out for a run, and I had just made coffee, still in pajamas. I peeked through the peephole and froze. It was my mother, alone. She looked thinner than I remembered. Her hair pulled back tightly, lips pressed in that familiar line that always came right before something cruel. I didn't open the door. Instead, I cracked the window just enough to hear her. "I came to talk," she said, as if that made it okay. "No," I said. "You came to guilt? To manipulate? Like always." Her face twisted. "You turned your brother against us. You ruined this family." I laughed, bitter and flat. "I didn't ruin anything. I just stopped pretending." She stepped forward. "Do you really think you're better than us? That Jamie's family is your replacement now." I didn't answer. She wasn't asking questions. She was looking for weak spots. Then came the line I'd been waiting for, the one I knew was coming. "After everything we did for Neil, he still chose you. After everything we gave you." "You didn't give me anything," I cut in. "You gave him everything. And you gave me silence. You watched me shrink myself for years so he could feel big." That stopped her. She blinked. Once. Twice. Then, softly, "I just wanted to protect him." "And what about me?" I asked. Who was protecting me while I went through every milestone alone? While I cried myself to sleep before finals? While I watched you cut into my birthday cake without me because Neil had the sniffles? Silence. "I deserved a family," I said. "And if I have to build it myself, brick by brick, without you, then so be it." She didn't argue. She just turned. Walked down the steps like the weight had finally caught up to her. No goodbye. No apology. Just distance. That was the last time I saw her. A week later, Jamie and I sent out our new address only to a select few. A couple cousins. Neil. We knew we couldn't erase the past, but we could protect the future. We even got a small note in the mail from Neil. No envelope. Just a folded index card. "One day at a time. Thank you for giving me the chance to grow. I'll spend the rest of my life earning it." No signature. Just a little drawing of a tree with roots reaching deep and strong. And you know what? That's what this whole journey felt like. Like digging through hard, painful dirt just to plant something better. Something honest. Sometimes family is inherited. Sometimes it's chosen. But the best kind? That's the kind you fight to build. And this time I finally got to be the one who stayed.